I think it's time to start the luncheon program. It is Edith Ramirez was here last year when she was a commissioner, and we were really pleased to welcome her back this year in her capacity as chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission. She's been a commissioner since April of 2010, and she's was designated by President Obama to serve as chairwoman effective March 4th of this year. Prior to joining the commission, she was a partner in the Los Angeles office of Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan. And prior to that, she was an associate at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, and she also clerked for the Honorable Alfred T. Goodwin in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. She's also been active in a variety of professional and community activities, and she served as vice president on the Board of Commissioners for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the nation's largest municipal utility. Chairwoman Ramirez is a graduate of the Harvard Law School, cum laude, where she served as an editor of the Harvard Law Review, and she holds an A.B. in history, magna cum laude, from Harvard University. Chairwoman Ramirez.
Thank you, Tom, for that very kind introduction, and I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon. The temptation to skip this talk and hike up to the Maroon Bells must have been nearly overwhelming. But I'm very glad that you didn't succumb, though I would have understood. As Oscar Wilde once quipped, I can resist anything except temptation. My topic for this afternoon is big data and the privacy challenges it may pose to consumers. What I want to do is to explore how we can reap the benefits of big data without falling prey to possible pitfalls. There's little doubt that the skyrocketing ability of business to store and analyze vast quantities of data will bring about seismic changes in ways that may be unimaginable today. Unlocking the potential of big data can, for instance, improve the quality of healthcare while cutting costs. It can enable forecasters to make increasingly precise predictions about weather, crop yields, and spikes in the consumption of electricity. And big data can improve industrial efficiency, helping to deliver better products and services to consumers at lower costs. But one might ask, can the Federal Trade Commission or any governmental entity safeguard consumer privacy given the breakneck pace of technological innovation? In my view, the answer is yes. The fact that big data may be transformative does not mean that the challenges it poses are, as some claim, novel or beyond the ability of our legal institutions to respond. Take the beautiful leaves of the aspen trees. In late summer, they turn from green to bright yellow, and the forest takes on a golden glow. That transformation is a breathtaking one. It's one of the wonders of the West. But not everything breathtaking is new. The transformation of the aspen trees happens every year. The emergence of big data is similarly breathtaking and potentially game-changing, but the challenges it poses to consumer privacy are familiar, even though they may be of a magnitude we have yet to see. The solutions are also familiar, and with the advent of big data, they are now more important than ever. Addressing the privacy challenges of big data is first and foremost the responsibility of those collecting and using consumer information. The time has come for businesses to move their data collection and use practices out of the shadows and into the sunlight. But the FTC also has a critical role to play. This afternoon, I will address both how businesses should approach big data to protect consumer privacy and how the FTC will work to ensure companies live up to that obligation. Let me begin with my vision of the FTC and its role in light of the emergence of big data. I I grew up in a beach town in Southern California. To me, the FTC is like the lifeguard on a beach. Like a vigilant lifeguard, the FTC's job is not to spoil anyone's fun, but to make sure that no one gets hurt. With big data, the FTC's job is to get out of the way of innovation while making sure that consumer privacy is respected. Congress gave us several tools to do just that. Under the FTC Act, it tasked us with preventing unfair or deceptive practices that may affect interstate commerce. This mandate gives the FTC authority over deceptive claims about matters that are important to consumers, including privacy and data security. For instance, in the FTC's actions against Google, Facebook, MySpace, and others, we allege that each of these companies deceived consumers by breaching commitments to keep their data confidential. That isn't okay, and it's the FTC's responsibility to make sure that companies live up to their commitments. Congress also assigned the FTC the responsibility to prevent unfair commercial practices. This is conduct that substantially harms consumers or threatens to substantially harm consumers, which consumers cannot reasonably avoid and where the harm outweighs the benefits. The FTC has used its unfairness authority against companies that fail to provide reasonable data security. Take one example. Last year, we sued the Wyndham Hotel chain for poor data security practices that led to 3 data breaches in an 18-month period. Over 500,000 credit card files ended up in the hands of an identity theft ring operating through domains registered in Russia. All told, the FTC has brought over 40 data security cases under our unfairness and deception authority, many against very large companies including LexisNexis, ChoicePoint, and Twitter, for failing to provide reasonable security safeguards. Congress has also charged the FTC with enforcing a number of sector-specific privacy laws, including the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or FCRA, which can be seen as the first big data privacy law. Congress enacted the FCRA because it was worried that growing databases, the big data of the 1970s, could be used in ways that were invisible and harmful to consumers. The FCRA sets out rules for companies that use data to determine creditworthiness, insurance eligibility, suitability for employment, and to screen tenants. When companies obtain this data from a credit bureau or other consumer reporting agency, they must notify consumers when the information contributed to decisions that adversely affect them. For example, denying them access to credit or giving them less than favorable credit terms, or turning them down for a job or insurance. Another statute that we enforce is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, which requires companies to get a parent's consent before collecting personal information from kids under 13. We recently updated our rule implementing COPPA to respond to collection practices made possible by new technology, namely data gathering tools like social media and mobile applications. So let's turn to the key big data questions. The term big data refers to data sets whose size is beyond the ability of typical database software tools to capture, store, manage, and analyze. And it's no surprise that data sets are expanding exponentially. Under Moore's law, the ability to store, aggregate, and combine data and conduct deep analyses has skyrocketed. McKinsey reports that in 2011, a consumer could purchase a disk to store all of the world's music for under $600. If Moore is right, the cost today would be less than $300. This phenomenal growth in storage and analytic power means that big data is no longer the province of a few giant companies, like large data brokers, banks, insurers, and healthcare providers. Big data is now, or soon will become, a tool available to all sectors of the economy. Of course, many uses of big data bring tangible benefits to consumers and businesses alike. And many uses of big data raise no threats to consumer privacy. For example, many firms use big data analytics for purposes that have nothing to do with individuals, forecasting weather and stock and commodity prices, upgrading network security systems, and improving manufacturing supply chains. On the other hand, many firms use big data in ways that implicate individual privacy. That data may reflect an individual's health concerns, browsing history, purchasing habits, social, religious, and political preferences, financial data, and more. They may do so in the service of innovation and efficiencies that confer substantial benefits on consumers. As I've said, the FTC's role isn't to stand in the way of innovation. It's to ensure that these advances are accompanied by sufficiently rigorous privacy safeguards. Earlier, I mentioned the possible pitfalls associated with big data. Let me address the hazards that we need to avoid. One risk is that the lure of big data leads to the indiscriminate collection of personal information. Some big data proponents argue that data is now the raw material of innovation, and therefore more data is always better. We are told that during the Industrial Revolution, there was no such thing as too much coal and iron ore. The resulting steel sparked the innovation that transformed the world: skyscrapers, high-speed trains, and so on. Today's raw material, the argument goes, is data, and we need as much of it as we can collect. That's a bridge, maybe even a steel bridge, I won't buy. The indiscriminate collection of data violates the first commandment of data hygiene. Thou shalt not collect and hold on to personal information that is not needed for the purpose identified. Keeping data on the off chance it might prove useful is not consistent with privacy best practices. And remember, not all data is created equally. Just as there is low-quality iron ore and coal, there is low-quality, unreliable data. And old data is of little value. Is there really any worth to my law school search history when I was struggling to understand the rule against perpetuities? Should that data be held in perpetuity? A related concern is that some big data advocates insist that because more data is always better, and because providing consumer choice may be especially challenging when it comes to big data, the time has come to reconsider limits on data collection. They contend that to the extent that privacy protection is needed, the focus should be on after-the-fact use restrictions, not on limiting collection. That argument stands privacy protection on its head. Let's go back to basics. Big data doesn't start out as big data. Rather, it's assembled bit by bit from little data and becomes big only when compiled into enormous databases. The little data often reflects deeply personal information about individuals: the medical treatment they receive, the products and services they buy, their physical location, the websites they surf, their intimate communications with friends and family, and the list goes on. Personal information should not be collected against consumers' wishes. Business leaders understand this. They know that the quickest way to squander consumer trust is to go behind consumers' backs when collecting and using personal data. Adding to the concerns is the reality that some collection of personal data is not, in fact, authorized by consumers. Consumers do, of course, often decide to share personal data. They post personal information on social networks. And in many instances, they consent to the collection of personal data by businesses and service providers. But that consent is generally limited to the transaction at hand. For example, to enable lenders to evaluate mortgage applications or companies to ship items purchased on the internet. Rarely, if ever, are consumers given a say about the aggregation of their personal data or secondary uses that are not even contemplated when their data is first collected. And the already intricate data collection ecosystem is becoming even more complex. For instance, the Internet of Things means more parts of our daily lives will generate data. Households with smart appliances such as refrigerators, televisions, thermostats, all saving energy and providing services well beyond the capabilities of dumb appliances will soon be widespread. These devices will be connected to the Internet, collecting information that will end up in the hands of manufacturers, service providers, and others. What are the privacy and security implications? These are questions that we're thinking about at the FTC, and we're holding a workshop in November to explore the unique issues associated with smart technology. Let me be clear, though. Focusing on consumer choice at the time of collection is critical, but use restrictions also have their place. No system of consumer choice can be perfect, and some uses of data are clearly out of bounds. The FCRA, which I mentioned earlier, is a classic use restriction. Other statutes also impose restrictions on the use of personal data, from genetic information to details about campaign donations. As important as they are, however, use restrictions have serious limitations and cannot by themselves provide effective privacy protection. Information that is not collected in the first place can't be misused. And enforcement of use restrictions provides little solace to consumers whose personal information has been improperly revealed. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Use restrictions are also hard to enforce. It's often difficult to identify the culprit when data is misused. Just look at your smartphone. It contains a wealth of personal information, contacts, photographs, geolocation data, emails, and incoming and outgoing phone numbers. Multiple players in the mobile ecosystem have access to that data, not just the carriers that provide the service, but the mobile applications you use, the ad networks that service those applications, the analytics companies, and many others. If data is stripped from your smartphone and misused, it may be impossible to determine which of the many entities is responsible. An endeavor that's made more difficult by the archaic division of responsibility between the Federal Communications Commission, which has jurisdiction over carriers, and the FTC, which in many instances has jurisdiction over all of the players except the carriers. The FTC has long urged Congress to rectify this ancient allocation by repealing the common carrier exception to the FTC's jurisdiction, and the rise of mobile technology underscores the need for congressional action. The risk of a data breach is also not trivial. After all, the larger the concentration of sensitive personal data, the more attractive a database is to criminals, both inside and outside a firm. And the risk of consumer injury increases as the volume and sensitivity of the data grows. An analogy makes my point. If a water in a glass spills, the consequences generally are manageable. You wipe up the water and move on. But if one builds a dam to store tremendous volumes of water and the dam breaks, the consequences can be quite serious. In other words, with big data comes big responsibility. Firms that acquire and maintain large sets of consumer data must be responsible stewards of that information. We can already bring actions under Section 5 of the FTC Act, and the FTC will continue to be active in data security under my watch. But stronger incentives to push firms to safeguard big data must be in place. The FTC has urged Congress to give the agency civil penalty authority against companies that fail to maintain reasonable security. The advent of big data only bolsters the need for this legislation. Another issue is that firms of all sorts are using consumer data in ways that may not just be contrary to consumers' expectations, but could also be harmful to their interests. This problem is perhaps seen most acutely with data brokers, companies that collect and aggregate consumer information from a wide array of sources to create detailed profiles of individuals. The concern is that their mega databases may contain highly sensitive information. The risk of improper disclosure of sensitive information is heightened because consumers know nothing about these companies and their practices are invisible to consumers. Last year, in our privacy report, the FTC called on data brokers to give consumers access to their information through an easy-to-find, easy-to-use common portal. The agency also supported legislation to give consumers access to and a right to dispute or suppress data held by brokers. To drill down even deeper into the workings of the industry, the Commission has also issued subpoenas to 9 data brokers. The subpoenas seek information about the nature and sources of the consumer information the data brokers collect, how they use, maintain, and disseminate the information, and the extent to which they allow consumers to access and correct their information or opt out of having their personal information sold. We expect to issue a report later this year with our findings. And I want to take this opportunity to commend my colleague, FTC Commissioner Julie Brill, for her efforts in highlighting the FTC's work regarding data brokers. The involuntary revelation of sensitive personal information is an important concern. but it's a risk that predates big data and is inherent in the collection and use of personal information. There's another risk that is a byproduct of big data analytics, namely that big data will be used to make determinations about individuals, not based on concrete facts, but on inferences or correlations that may be unwarranted. Let's call this possibility data determinism. Individuals may be judged not because of what they've done or what they will do in the future, but because inferences or correlations drawn by algorithms suggest they may behave in ways that make them poor credit or insurance risks, unsuitable candidates for employment or admission to schools or other institutions, or unlikely to carry out certain functions. Using correlations in this reductive way may make sense to the companies that rely on them. The law of big numbers means that if the algorithm is correct, in general, the companies will be making the right call. An error rate of 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 may be tolerable to the company. To the consumer who has been miscategorized, however, that categorization may feel like arbitrariness by algorithm. The fact that decision by algorithm may be less than perfect is not to condemn the enterprise. Far from it. Using data-driven analytics to improve decision-making may be an important step forward. After all, human decision-making is not error-free. People often make imperfect decisions for a variety of reasons, including incomplete information, poor decisional tools, or irrational bias. But the built-in imperfections in the decision by algorithm process demand transparency, meaningful oversight and procedures to remediate decisions that adversely affect individuals who have been wrongly categorized. At the very least, companies must ensure that by using big data algorithms, they are not accidentally classifying people based on categories that society has decided, by law or ethics, not to use, such as race, ethnic background, gender, or sexual orientation. Of course, where the FCRA applies, consumers already have access and correction rights. The FTC has been stepping up its FCRA enforcement efforts, and that trend is going to continue. So far, I've talked about the possible hazards of big data, and that's in keeping with the FTC's role here. To worry about the potential adverse impacts of the use of big data and to figure out how to mitigate those risks. The FTC's privacy agenda aims to persuade companies to minimize risks in ways that encourage, not undercut, their ability to reap the rewards of a data-driven economy. We urge companies to follow the 3 core principles laid out in our 2012 privacy report: privacy by design, simplified choice, and greater transparency. In that report, we also urged Congress to enact baseline privacy legislation that is informed by those principles, and I renew that call today. Privacy by design means building privacy in as products and services are being developed. To do that, companies need to perform risk assessments to lay bare vulnerabilities by asking tough questions. Are security measures appropriate given the volume and sensitivity of the data? Is the analytic inquiry sufficiently fine-tuned to draw correlations with reasonable confidence? Could the contemplated uses cause harm to individuals, such as financial loss, injury to reputation, or unlawful discrimination? And if so, can these risks be avoided or mitigated? Once these risks have been assessed, privacy by design enables prudent engineers to design systems that better safeguard privacy. We also need to go back to first principles and take consumer choice seriously. Too often, the notice part of this process is overlooked, even though it's a prerequisite to meaningful choice. Consumers must be told who is collecting their data and what the information will be used for. And choice mechanisms must be simple and easy to use. We need to design data acquisition methodologies that provide transparency from the very first interaction and reaffirm transparency throughout the life cycle of personal data. To that end, in the context of the collection of data that occurs as consumers surf the web, we need a workable do-not-track option that will put consumers back in control over the collection of their personal information. But the need for greater transparency is not limited to collection of data about consumers' online behavior. A recurring theme I have emphasized, and one that runs through the agency's privacy work is the need to move commercial data practices into the sunlight. For too long, the way personal information is collected and used has been at best an enigma enshrouded in considerable smog. We need to clear the air. In fact, for every pitfall I've mentioned, transparency is an essential part of the solution. Simplified choice ensures that consumers understand who is collecting their data and what it's being used for, and that they are given a say in whether that data is collected and how it is used. As we rely on smart technology to improve our lives, transparency will enable consumers to know what information is being collected and with whom that information is being shared. As companies move to using big data analytics to make determinations that could adversely affect consumers, transparency will empower consumers to make sure they are being treated fairly. And expanding consumer access to information that data brokers hold about them will help ensure their practices are transparent. Transparency is the key to accountability, the key to responsible data collection and use, and the key to building consumer trust. Justice Brandeis was surely right when he observed that sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. There is also one risk mitigation technique that is uniquely applicable to the rise of big data: de-identification. De-identification encourages firms that convert little data into big data to pay attention to stripping out unique identifiers to render the data anonymous. While de-identification isn't foolproof, in our privacy report, the FTC has offered an approach to de-identification that seeks to balance the benefits of de-identification with the risks that anonymous data will be re-identified. Our recommendations are particularly important in a big data world. Legend has it that it's a Chinese curse to say to someone, "May you live in interesting times." I, for one, am delighted not only to be living in an interesting time, but to be heading up an agency that is deeply involved in the policy issues surrounding the innovations that big data will bring. Lifeguards have to be mindful not just of the people swimming, surfing, and playing in the sand. They also have to be alert to approaching storms, tidal patterns, and shifts in the ocean's current. With consumer privacy, the FTC is doing just that. We are alert to the risks, but confident that those risks can be managed. The FTC recognizes that the effective use of big data has the potential to unleash a new wave of productivity and growth. Like the lifeguard at the beach, though, the FTC will remain vigilant to ensure that while innovation pushes forward, consumer privacy is not engulfed by that wave. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Any?
Speech, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my very boring governance question. Former Congressman Stearns said in the panel this morning that the FTC is the privacy regulator for the country, and I think that's de facto correct. My question is, how do you go about making and implementing policy? With the exception of the Fair Credit Reporting Act and Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, perhaps some other areas, the FTC doesn't have rulemaking authority. So you proceed under Section 5, unfair and deceptive practice authority, by bringing litigation and issuing reports and recommendations. Do you think that from the standpoint of the regulated community as well as consumers, that not having rules that are subject to notice and comment rulemaking, not subject to cost-benefit analysis, that it really allows the FTC to develop policies in the most effective and in a way that preserves the innovation that you've talked about? So I apologize for kind of an administrative procedure question, but it really goes to how do you set policy without issuing rules?
Let me say that we do our best at the FTC to take into account the balance between innovation and the need for meaningful privacy protection. We are using the tools that we have to be effective in that regard, and we're doing it using the means that you've mentioned. We were doing it through law enforcement, using our authority against deception and unfair practices. We are also using it by engaging with businesses, with consumer advocates, privacy advocates, academics, economists, which of course we have also internally at the agency. And we're doing it by just doing some hard thinking and putting out what we believe are best practices in the area of privacy. At the same time, the FTC last year, as part of its report, did urge Congress to enact baseline privacy legislation. I continue to support that. I believe the time has come for Congress to take action. And my hope is that while it may not happen immediately, given what is happening in Washington these days, that Congress will see to it and take action in this regard. But we do, I think, a good job of taking into account the impact on business. But again, I think our role here is also to ensure that meaningful protection is provided to consumers.
Chris Wolf from the Future of Privacy Forum and Hogan Lovells. Thank you for your speech, and to extend your analogy, you really covered the waterfront on a lot of issues. And I also have kind of a process administrative question. And it goes to, how does the commission learn about the technologies that it is opining on, either in reports or during an investigation? What kind of staff support do you have? Do you think it's sufficient? And do you need more?
We could always use more resources. But we work very hard in this area, and first and foremost, we do have a chief technologist at the agency. We have made it a priority to recruit staff who has the requisite technological expertise that we need in order to make sure that we stay abreast of the technological developments that take place, learn about new technologies, but we're also just consistently every day engaging with the business sector, with industry, trying to do what we can to learn about emerging technologies, other developments that we see. So we're doing everything that we can. It's a top priority for us to stay abreast of these. As I mentioned, one of the new and emerging issues that we see have to do with the fact that a number of, that increasingly we're going to be seeing common devices, refrigerators, televisions, other appliances, also devices at work that are going to be generating considerable data, and these devices will likely be connected to the internet, and so that's an area that we feel that we need to be learning more about. And so we do hold workshops in which we invite commenters, we invite industry, everyone, and all relevant stakeholders to participate, precisely for the reason that you mentioned, that it's important for us to stay current and to stay abreast of new developments.
Hi, Baron Soka, Tech Freedom. I appreciate everything you had to say about the balance the FTC tries to strike and the importance of innovation, especially when it comes to big data. But the particular analogy you gave about the lifeguard and the thing you said afterwards was a little bit troubling. You said that you thought the FTC's job was to make sure that no one gets hurt. And you then segued into talking about unfairness. Unfairness really contemplates the idea that in a changing environment, there are always going to be trade-offs. And in fact, some people are going to get hurt. We're never going to have a perfect world where nobody gets hurt. And if we did, we would wipe out very beneficial services. So that this leads me to two general concerns. The first is the one that Alan raised, which is about process. The FTC does have rulemaking authority under Magnuson-Moss. It chooses not to use it. It chooses to complain about it, and maybe it could be changed, but it has a tool it doesn't use. The second way it brings, it makes law in this area is to bring enforcement actions without ever really explaining in a full way what the legal basis is for the enforcement action. And since those cases are almost always settled, in fact, after 41 data security cases, only finally now have we seen Wyndham finally challenge the FTC, we on the outside don't really know what the law is. We have only the FTC's assertions as to what the law is that a particular company in a particular case was willing to settle. And the third way is the FTC issues reports describing, as you said, what the FTC thinks best practices would be, which may or may not be right, but it's not lawmaking. And that leads me to my second and broadest concern, my question to you, which is, what exactly is the FTC's legal basis for doing these things? And in particular, when you hearken back to the FTC's unfairness policy statement, the FTC was nearly shut down by a Democratic Congress not simply for using its authority very generally, but for having interpreted the Supreme Court's Berry versus Hutchison decision in such a way as to really start to depart from an injury requirement, to bring enforcement actions and to make rulemakings without actually establishing injury. So some of the things that you've said today suggest that you think that the FTC has a basis for enforcement when there is no deception simply because a user hasn't chosen. For example, users may not choose that every search term that they enter would be used to develop something like Google Flu Trends. But it's hard to see how that really harms them, and it's hard to see how that model of expecting consumers to choose about every single use of their information is really either good for innovation or is grounded in the FTC's authority to punish harmful practices. So, in summary, where exactly does the FTC draw its legal authority to institute that sort of sweeping consent requirement for every use of personal information?
You had quite a few questions embedded in there, but let me take a stab at this. I mean, first of all, let me say, again, I think when it comes to privacy, there are a whole slew of very complicated questions that are raised, and I'm not purporting to say that the FTC has all of the answers. I personally believe that there needs to be congressional action in this realm, addressing some of the balancing that needs to take place, and I also believe that the FTC should be giving rulemaking authority. At the same time, given that has not happened, what the FTC is doing is to legitimately use its Section 5 authority where we believe companies have violated the prohibition against deception or where they have substantially harmed consumers using our unfairness authority. If you look at all of the cases that we've brought, and I do believe that the enforcement actions we've brought do explain the rationale and the basis for us moving forward. I believe that those have been serious and egregious situations. Data security is the main area in which we've been using our unfairness authority. Again, take a look at the Wyndham case that I cited in my remarks. There, it's our view that the company did not use reasonable data security measures. As a result, more than 500,000 credit card numbers ended up in the hands of identity theft ring operation that has domains name based in Russia. That's the kind of situation where there's substantial consumer harm or the likelihood of substantial consumer harm where an entity like the FTC ought to be taken action. And I believe that, and we're going to be continuing to use our authority, and I think it's well within our province to do so.
One more question.
Just a quick question, Dan O'Connor from CCIA. You're kind enough to open up one of our. Hold on a sec. Sorry. Dan O'Connor from CCIA. You were kind enough to open up one of our events a couple months ago, talking about the IP and antitrust intersection, where you explained, and this is switching topic a little bit from the data brokers, but I was curious as to if you had any updates on the work that the Commission is doing on the Section 7, or the Section 7B, or 5B study, I'm sorry, or 6B study.
6B study, patent assertion entities?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I jumped all over those sections. If any updates on the 6B study and any information that you've gleaned looking through and examining some of the more troubling practices in the patent ecosystem.
No further update, just to say that the Commission is exploring engaging in a 6B study, and I hope to make an announcement with that regard later this fall, but it's something that the Commission is looking at very closely. We're obviously very deeply interested in the activity of patent assertion entities and patents generally as they intersect with the competition laws, so we're going to be active in that area, and I'll have more to say in that in the fall. Thank you.